Vikings stand pat at the trade deadline, but that doesn't mean things aren't changing in Minnesota. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Today on the show, the Vikings stand pat at the trade deadline. However, some shakeups on special teams. We mentioned it a little bit in yesterday's show, but now it's official. The Vikings have a new kicker and a new long snapper, at least for the time being, as Andrew DePaola and Will Reichard go on IR. The Vikings also don't have as much of an O-line issue as you think. So today's episode is going to go a little bit more in depth on the Colts game and the film there. A couple things that I noticed on the offensive side of the ball before we transition tomorrow into crossover Thursday, Jaguars mode with Tony Wiggins, and we move onward. But first things first, roster things changing. The Vikings ended up, according to Alec Lewis, they poked around a little bit. That was the way he put it on Twitter. That they poked around a little bit for some defensive help at the trade deadline, but ultimately nothing came to fruition. They're saying, okay, we're really happy with our group. That's not how things were reported earlier in the week. My guess, though, is that that's just kind of how it goes, that they say we would love some help, but everything was more expensive than they were willing to do, and so they're just going to stand pat. They're not going to give up any more draft picks. Obviously, they're pretty short on those right now, so they're going to be a little stingier, and no deal came to fruition. It is what it is. Nobody traded away either. Nothing at the trade deadline. Cam Robinson was their trade deadline move. But Will Reichard, some clarity on his injury. So Kevin O'Connell says now that his injury was suffered on the between the field goals and the extra points. So the field goals that Will Reichard missed on Sunday night, essentially they're saying that wasn't because of the injury. The injury hadn't happened yet. And the injury happened later and was bothering him when he went out for like the last extra point, basically, or some of the scores in the second half of that game. Meanwhile, Andrew DePaola hurts his hand on a tackle in that game as well. Both of them go on short-term IR. They are both now out for a minimum of 5 weeks, which means the Vikings need a kicker and they need a long snapper, and they need to put that operation together really fast. So I would not be surprised to see those guys get a little bit more time and TLC than special teamers usually get in a week of practice to get themselves ready to go for a 3-game road stint that's about to happen now, which will start in Jacksonville. Those guys are John Parker Romo, who came in and tried out for the kicking job. The Vikings seemed okay with him, I guess, okay enough with him to make him kind of the guy, the Rolodex guy. He's going to get signed to the active roster to replace. And Jake McQuaid, who is 36 years old. He's been in the league since 2011. He was initially the long snapper for like 8 years for the St. Louis Rams. And he's also been around the NFC North a little bit, so he's kind of in a journeyman era as a long snapper is. Very similar profile to Andrew DePaola, where he's like this guy that's been doing it forever. So he'll be the long snapper. John Parker Romo will be the kicker. That'll be the operation now, and everything else will remain the same. So in the preseason and in camp, when we had a kicker battle going and we hadn't yet cut John Parker Romo, I did an episode about the kickers. It was about Will Reichard, and it was his Everyman series and everything, so it was a little bit more human interest, but I also wrote a more substantive piece and did a Patreon video, which that Patreon video is now free to watch, on kicking and the mechanics and kind of what to look for. So if you're interested in how this is going to change things, right, I can't imagine it's going to be the same amount of consistent. And part of that is because, obviously you're changing things in the middle of the season. That's going to lead to some issues, but also because when I learned a lot of what I learned was from a clinic given by the Alabama special teams coordinator. The guy used Will Reichard in a lot of the examples of like what he's trying to accomplish. One of the biggest differences was the way that you sink your hips into a kick. So So this is something that you can look for if you really want to like flex and show off your knowledge while you're watching with your friends or family or whatever on Sunday. Is you can take you can watch the kicker's hips the whole time, like watch the line between his jersey and his pants, and if that line jumps up, they call it jumping into the kick. Like kicking gurus talk about it that way, or kickers talk about it that way. They call it jumping into the kick, and you don't want it. Will Reichard jumps into the kick ever so slightly, but it's not enough to make him inconsistent, and it's exactly the same every time, which makes it far less of a concern, right? The whole point about kicking, really what you want is for every kick to look exactly the same. Our bodies have a lot of moving parts, right? We've got a lot of limbs, a lot of counterbalances, a lot of physical things that will make the way that you strike the ball a little different every time if it's not perfectly still. If you're an avid golfer or a baseball player, you probably know what I'm talking about here, right? If you are a golfer, everything that's not supposed to move needs to be absolutely still. If it's not supposed to be winding and unwinding to make your swing really good, your head's supposed to be still, your lower legs are supposed to be still, your hips are supposed to be still until they're not, right? Like everything is supposed to not move at all because you don't want to introduce additional variables. It's the same way with kicking. And the difference that I saw between Reichard and John Parker Romo was that Reichard had that one little thing that is like technically not by the book, but is not a significant enough example of that issue to be like a problem that causes him to miss a lot, and is so exactly the same every time that like, okay, clearly he's found a way to like strike the ball true, and this is fine. John Parker Romo would jump a little bit worse into the kicks, and he would also plant a little bit differently sometimes. And his arm, his like counterbalance arm, you want that arm to be out, like the offhand. If you're kicking with your right foot, your left arm, you want that left arm to essentially be out at like perfectly parallel to the ground. And sometimes it would be high, and sometimes it would be low, and that leads to different balance. If you plant too close to the ball, your foot could come back through at a different angle and like hit the ball, push it wide a different direction. All these little variables, and John Parker Romo's just weren't quite as consistent, even in makes, and it was kind of hard to find examples of John Parker Romo kicks to examine. You had to go to a kicking camp that he did, and that viral like 72-yarder that he did. Do you remember that? Where there was a clip of him hitting a 72-yarder from a tee, but still that was part of his fame when he was in the XFL. And then his XFL kicks, kind of hard to find clips of those. But once you compiled enough of them, you could see little things popping up and then not popping up again. And so you didn't have the same consistency, which led me to go, oh, okay, Will Reichard's going to win this competition outright. Even though I don't know if it was ever a real competition. They spent a draft pick on the kicker. I don't know if they were just going to cut him for the XFL guy. But regardless, that's how it went down, whether you think it was a real competition or not. Will Reichard won it. Now that you have John Parker Romo, you have a slightly less consistent guy with just a few little issues. And that means that the misses, like it might not necessarily even come down to distance, right? He has a huge leg. He can make a very long kick. So they might try really long kicks, and it's going to be totally random when the problems arise that lead to a miss. He could miss a 38-yarder just as easily as he could make a 52-yarder, and those two things might happen on the same day. And I guess I'm here to tell you, don't be confused by that, because his problems don't have a lot to do with how much more distance you're putting on it. It's just consistency, and it's going to be kind of a facet of randomness how long the kick is that he's trying when those inconsistencies actually lead to a miss. I don't have a lot to say about Jake McQuaid, the long snapper. He's been in the league forever, so I have to assume he's doing okay. But Andrew DePaola was maybe the best long snapper in the league for like 3 years. And I'm not saying that just to be a homer. Like he was, had like the most consistency. I know PFF charts that, and basically their grade is just an accuracy metric for long snappers. Like it's literally just, did the snap go long, which is a weird way to grade a long snapper, because like they also do like punt coverage and like tackling and stuff like that. But either way, like he was best at that. Pro Bowls and all that. Like he was you can make an evidence-based argument that he was the best long snapper in the league. So I'm assuming that also probably won't be as consistent. So the special teams might become an issue, and there's not much that they can do about that. They just are going to have to limp through a few games with maybe some wonky special teams until Reichard and DePaola are back from their injuries, which will be a minimum of 4 weeks. The Vikings didn't do anything. They didn't go trade for another guard. Obviously, the O-line was the target of their one deadline range trade. That was Cam Robinson. How did he do? What about Ed Ingram and Garrett Bradbury? I want to talk some O-line. That'll be next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Ultimate Pro Football GM. Remember, these guys, this is the football simulation game where you can kind of play GM. It's a game on your phone that allows you to make draft picks, make salary cap decisions. If you are particularly frustrated with the Vikings not doing anything else at the deadline and you want to play GM because you think you can do better, do it on your phone. It's a nice kind of pass the time game. Maybe if you had to wait in a really long line yesterday for any given reason, maybe that would be the kind of thing that can help with that sort of situation. And they've got something new. So either download the app, or if you already have it, give it an update, and you will get head coach career mode. So you can actually call offensive plays during the games, and it's not just team management. Now you're actually play calling and getting a little bit more involved on game days as well for your Ultimate Pro Football GM franchise. Here's a special offer also for just Locked On fans. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL, all caps, inside the game store, and you receive a free boost to your franchise. And make sure to get it, as this perk will jumpstart your play and give you the advantage you will want in creating a dynasty. Download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. That's Ultimate Pro Football GM. Start your dynasty today. This episode is also brought to you by Prize Picks, which has been my favorite way to play daily fantasy football all year long. I have been having an absolute blast of a time on Prize Picks, especially when it's like Chiefs-Bucks, and I don't really care about Chiefs-Bucks on Monday Night Football at all, but now I do because I had a Prize Picks lineup going. I suffered a really rough bad beat, and I was very close. But you know what? We're just going to run that thing back and go back to Prize Picks. So you can pick all kinds of things like not only can you pick something like Travis Kelce to get more than 59.5 receiving yards, but their demons and goblins allow you to adjust that depending on how confident you are. So if 59.5 feels like, hey, I like Travis Kelce, but maybe not that much, you can go 49.5 and you won't quite get as much payout, but it's a little safer. You can also go, that's the goblin route, but you can also go the demon route and say, wow, I think Travis Kelce is going to get 100. You can do that and get a much bigger payout. You can get up to 100 times your money if you are right on Prize Picks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. When you are done here, I would love it if you checked out patreon.com/LukeBrownNFL. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk a lot about O-line, and I'm going to get into some nitty-gritty details. If you don't believe me, because I got a hot take that the O-line actually played really, really well against Indianapolis, like dominantly well to the point where I think Ed Ingram might have been one of the key reasons we won that game. That might be a spicy take that you're not ready to hear. Let me explain myself, but if just an audio medium isn't good enough for you, patreon.com/LukeBrownNFL, I show my work there. So if you must see the evidence, that's where you can find it. For everybody else, yeah, that's the take. I think Ed Ingram might have literally been one of the biggest reasons the Vikings won that game, and he actually kind of took it to DeForest Buckner on a lot of occasions. The broadcast didn't point those occasions out, which I'm very disappointed by because I don't think they accurately represented how that game went. So there's a few things to talk about here. Obviously, there are a couple of plays that you're probably screaming at me about in your head, like the one where Garrett Bradbury ended up on his butt and, the strip sack, total disaster thing. You might have seen a replay of that one, but in case you haven't, Bradbury stepped on Ingram's foot and slipped, and then he kind of got tangled up, and that's why he fell over. It wasn't just a pure strength problem. And the reason that kind of thing happens, and it happens to Bradbury I think a good bit. He gets tripped up a lot because he takes a really wide stance. His wide stance is a factor of being smaller. I explained this a little bit on yesterday's show as well. but his wide stance is a factor of it being a smaller center. There are a lot of different ways for centers to try to deal with that. A wide stance is a fairly commonly used one, and it's the way he's been his whole career. So I probably wouldn't ask him to change that. But Ed Ingram's feet were a little bit slow out the gate there, and so they got a little tangled up. Being a little bit slow out of your stance, not egregiously so, but just, man, if you could have just like been a little bit shorter and choppier with that first kick step. That first kick step was just a little bit long for me. It was a little bit greedy with how much depth he tried to get off the first step. Maybe get that first step off, get out of everybody's way, and then you can do a longer step on the second one. And that's just drilling it, just choosing to drill it a different way. It's very much a decision with pros and cons, and a different one would have helped there. So it's not even a critique. It's just, man, you could have picked apples instead of oranges there, if you will. Could have fixed that issue. But really, it was just a little bit too slow, and it just got absolutely giga punished, right? It's just the worst punish possible for that relatively small issue of being a millisecond slow out of your stance. Turns into this like cascade of all these other issues. I think a lot of that was luck. I think it was a bad play that was probably worse than it deserved to be because of bad luck. That's what I'm going to say. It wasn't a good play. It was still a bad play worth critiquing, but it was a lot worse than it deserved to be. So that was what I thought about that play. And elsewhere, the Colts basically spent the whole game trying to get DeForest Buckner on Ed Ingram one-on-one. Sometimes the Vikings would successfully decline that. They would deny that. And Blake Brandel would end up one-on-one with Grover Stewart on the other side, or whoever was in, right? There's a lot of rotating. Those guys weren't on the field every play. On so many of those occasions, outside of a couple that you probably remember because the broadcast pointed them out and went, whoa, look, you could just hear Chris Collinsworth going, whoa, about it. Ed Ingram not only held up, but dominated. Like, he dominated a lot of those reps. And forget about it in the run game. Oh my goodness, in the run game, DeForest Buckner was having a game that I don't think was characteristic of him. Like, if I watched that one and you told me that one of those guys was like a bona fide, like NFL, household name kind of player, I probably wouldn't have guessed that it was 99, the guy with the arm brace, if I didn't know who was who. Again, you're going to have to take my word for it unless you're willing to go over to my Patreon where I show my work on that. But it was really, really good. And the fact that the Colts' entire pass rush plan seemed to be set up your one-on-one somewhere on the interior and then hope you just win on the edges against that new tackle that came in. And it just sort of didn't work that well. Sam Darnold, at least according to PFF's pressure metrics, was under pressure 13 of 39 of his reps. That's a pretty good rate. And that's, according to PFF, there are going to be other pressure stats that do it all differently, and I have my issues with all of them. But if you want to just talk like volume, it didn't happen that much. It happened a couple times that stick out really hard in your mind because that's how our brains are biased to remember things. But if you want to take the whole body of work, the whole game, there's a lot more to like than there is to dislike. So if your plan was to one-on-one a guy so much that carries your pass rush plan, and it didn't carry your pass rush plan, it essentially means that by Ed Ingram winning that matchup enough times, the matchups of Kwity Paye or Dio Odenigbo, the matchups against Cam Robinson and everything else wasn't good enough to carry the Colts, and the whole pass rush fell apart. They hinged it on one thing. They kind of put their eggs in that basket, and the Vikings turned that basket upside down, and all the eggs fell out and broke. And that got Sam Darnold clean enough where he could throw 3 touchdowns in the second half. That's maybe my best way to describe what happened on the interior there. But then there's also what happened in the exterior with Cam Robinson, and how exciting that is that he actually had a really nice game, as well as you could expect for a guy who just got here. Those blemishes were still there, and I kind of do want to explain what they were, and hopefully how we can expect stuff to just continue to get better as he gets more comfortable with Blake Brandel next to him. So that will be next. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And right now at FanDuel, you can get $150 in bonus bets by winning any $5 bet. If it's your first one, go sign up at FanDuel and drop $5 on whatever you want. And it can be the most obvious thing in the world. You can put $5 on the Bills minus 4,000 to win the AFC East. Of course they're going to win the AFC East, and of course you're going to get your $150 in bonus bets, but you're going to get that at 30-1 because of this promo, $5 into 150. So if you want to get in on that, you can find whatever it is that you want. You can, of course, bet on individual games, such as the Vikings, who are 4.5-point favorites right now in Jacksonville. Over under there is 47.5, or whatever else you want, divisional odds, however you want to slice it. You can find it at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Moving on here with this episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. Now it's time to talk about Cam Robinson. This is probably the thing that people are most curious about, is how did Cam Robinson do? So if you want like an in-depth tape breakdown of Cam Robinson, the episode from exactly a week ago, the Wednesday episode, was exactly that, where I talked about the trade terms and all that, but also a lot of film analysis. And it brings me great pleasure to report that he's the same guy. That he has a lot of the same habits, and that's a pretty good thing for the Vikings. The one-on-one pass pro moments were exactly what I would have expected if I watched his last two Jaguars games and went, he'll just be the same guy here. And that's a pretty good tackle. That works out. To recap, Cam Robinson is very big and strong for a tackle, like by tackle standards, big boy, strong boy. And big boy, strong boy, when all he needs to do is move a guy, great stuff. Good. We can ask him to do that all day long. And as a new tackle, those run game assignments are a lot easier. So running mid-zone his direction was a great plan on Sunday night and will continue to be a great plan, because all he has to do is get his big old paws on somebody and move them toward the sideline on mid-zone. Mid-zone, that is what that play side tackle does. And then the play side guard and the center combo up whatever interior lineman is over there, whether it's a nose or a 3-tech or a 2-eye or whatever it is. They combo from that guy up to whatever linebacker it is, and then you hopefully can hit that run up the B gap, where you can get this nice little lane between them. So all the tackle has to do is widen a guy out, right? There's no thinking to it. You're my edge rusher, I'm widening you. And it's a nice, simple role, and they used that a lot to great effect. I think it was a really good game plan for easing a new tackle into our playbook. He's been in the league 8 years. He knows how to block. He knows how to do a kick out block on zone. And he's big and he's strong, and so it works for his body type as well. So even after he's more comfortable with the playbook, that's still a really good idea, and it fits great with what that's a Viking staple. They're gonna love that. When it came to combo blocking, this is where you get into some of the chemistry issues, where he was just not quite that adept at timing when he was supposed to peel off one block and go to the next. If he was supposed to combo up to a linebacker or something. So like Zaire Franklin was able to get around him a couple times because he was just late to come off the double he was in with Blake Brandel. That's a chemistry thing to me. When you're double teaming with somebody, if you're used to playing with that guy, you look at how, Ed Ingram and Garrett Bradbury do this together, right? They've been doing this together for 3 years now. When they double somebody, they are really adept at knowing exactly how much help the other one needs. So if Ed Ingram's the one that's going to have to stay on the D lineman, and Bradbury is going to climb up to the linebacker, Bradbury knows exactly how much time he needs to stay on that double for Ed Ingram to get where he needs to get to stay on that lineman, and exactly when is too early and when is too late for Bradbury to peel off and start going to get his guy. They're really good at that timing. Cam Robinson and Blake Brandel, not so good at that timing, not so used to each other yet, right? And that's something that I would expect to finish out or to get a little better as time goes on. It's also something that I don't really remember the Jags doing a lot of with him. Their run game was different. I think they did a lot of gap, a little more gap, if I recall. So that might not be something that he's quite as used to doing, but he's run plenty of zone over the years in Jacksonville. It's not like it's a bad scheme fit or anything. It's just going to take a minute for him to get up to speed on those. And so you might see a few low octane mistakes. Nothing to be concerned about, and certainly only a short-term concern, if that. So there's that, and then there's the pass pro of it all, right? So when he was just trying to block an edge rusher one-on-one, and the Colts really wanted him to do that. They really set up a lot of things to go occupy Blake Brandel, get no help from him. If you weren't chipping with Cam Robinson, which the Vikings did a lot of to help him out, but if you weren't chipping with Cam Robinson, he was taking that guy one-on-one. And in those situations, I think Kwity Paye gave him more trouble than anybody else because Kwity Paye has a better speed to power than I think anybody else in the Colts. Everybody else he could anchor against. Kwity Paye got him, made him struggle with the anchor a little more, and he gave up a couple pressures that way. And that was very similar to how he played in Jacksonville. He's, again, big boy, strong boy. We can anchor on these. But if a sufficiently strong player also can get leverage on him, then he's not going to start hop techniquing and really doing it the way he likes to anchor. He throws his upfield foot back and he likes to try to like kind of anchor asymmetrically on like one leg. And that sometimes that's not as powerful as like the hop technique anchor that you'll see centers do. That's not quite as, that's a little bit more of a leverage move, which of course centers use a better leverage move than big old tackles. But it's like not quite enough if the guy's sufficiently strong, and Kwity Paye was. So he got a couple on him, but it was nothing catastrophic. I think the bigger issue was picking up stunts, which again is like a chemistry thing between Cam Robinson and Blake Brandel in terms of the levels that those guys need to be at. And again, the timing of if this guy is crashing, how far do I need to carry him across the formation before I trust that the guy across from me is going to pick him up and that I can now go look at the looper that's coming around to me, or, vice versa. Both those guys thinking that about the other. So those guys just need to get a little more used to playing together. And it's one of those things that won't get fixed overnight. It's not just going to be beautiful next week. There's probably going to be some pressures coming from there, but hopefully it's less and less and less and less over time as they get a little more used to each other. It's the kind of thing that after 3 or 4 games, you start to get a feel for. So I don't see this being a major issue beyond a month, but it is the kind of thing that, yeah, they're probably going to have some pressure on Sam Darnold for that. And then you have to hope that doesn't turn Sam Darnold into a total, mess and a half and he goes and throws a stupid interception or something. All in all, O-line was awesome. I'll die on that hill. The O-line was awesome in this game. If you don't think so, you're just thinking too hard about a couple of plays. That's like the way I feel there. If you don't believe me, I got 75 minutes of tape analysis that you can go watch. You can sub to my Patreon for less than $4 a month. You can sub to it, watch that video and unsub, and it cost you probably less than you paid for a cup of coffee last time you bought a cup of coffee. So you can go check that out. Tomorrow will be crossover Thursday with Tony Wiggins. So we will, I'm very excited to get that out to you. Love talking to Tony so much. He's one of my favorites at the whole network. Tony is an absolute delight. So very excited to talk to him. I will see you all for that. And as always, Skull.